Hola, buenas noches a todos. Bienvenidos a la cabaña. Hoy estamos aquí con un invitado muy especial con el que teníamos muchas ganas de charlar. Su nombre es Andrew Weathers, es un músico que reside actualmente en Texas, en los Estados Unidos, y con el que vamos a tener una conversación acerca de su obra, sus intereses y otros temas que esperamos que encontréis muy interesantes. Vale, so this is the Spanish. Vale. So, hello everybody. Today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Andrew Weathers. He's a composer and musician who currently resides in Texas. His work engages with notions of place, tradition, repetition, and spirit, splitting the difference between folk music and land art. This is the description actually that I found from the. I hope it describes well your perspective there and your approach. Welcome to our channel, Andrew. It's true pleasure to have you with us today. How are you feeling?
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you guys asking me to do this. It's fun to get a chance to, talk about my own work because I don't really get to a whole lot.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is personality that I don't I tend to just present the work, and it's just if people get it, people get it. And it seems from our conversations before, it seems like you guys get a lot of what I'm putting down without me laying it out for you, and that's something I really appreciate.
Okay. So we're gonna be talking about some of your work, some of your interests. We're also very interested in discussing some of the concepts that I've seen come up, like in some of your releases, and also like your labels. Like we're gonna try to bring this all together because overall we think it's a really interesting perspective that we can really connect with on so many different levels. So, yeah.
Amazing.
We will go on now with some question to know a bit more about you first of all. Yeah, and then about your work for sure. First, Andrew, we think you are based in Littlefield, Texas, but I think you are not from there. Tell us a bit more about your background, the Llano Estacado region in which you currently reside, and also why you decide to move there in the first place.
I grew up in North Carolina, and I lived there until I was about 22 and moved to California, to Oakland for grad school, and stayed there for about 6 years. And, that's in the Bay Area, and it's kind of wildly expensive. And it felt pretty untenable. And my partner, Gretchen, and I, we had been traveling a lot in the Southwest and Southern California, and had the notion that like maybe moving to a small town would be cheaper, more affordable, and maybe there's something interesting to be had there. And that was kind of when I first started to think about land in my own work. And that was more along the lines of like musically interpreting landscapes and that sort of thing. Nothing too direct. And so we were just looking around the Southwest for affordable properties, for very, very affordable property. And we ended up finding this building that we live in downtown Littlefield. And it was a little bit of happenstance that we found it. And we didn't seek out Littlefield in particular. We didn't seek out the Llano Estacado in particular. But pretty quickly we came to learn that it's a really pretty historically fascinating region with history dating back to the earliest human history in North America. It's pretty amazing and not something I think a lot of people are aware of. And so we moved here in 2017 and renovated this building. And we live in it, and it is, our studios are both in the front. So I have a recording studio here that I work out of. And it's kind of right in the downtown of a pretty dilapidated and empty downtown. There are several people that live in similar situations, just looking for affordable housing. There's up the block, there's a guy who has a tattoo shop in the front, and his whole family lives in the back. And at this point, that's like most of the occupation of the buildings downtown, because the region is economically very depressed, and the town in particular has been hit by, kind of not disasters exactly, but just trouble after trouble for the past 20 years or so. And so it's kind of like, it's just made for a very affordable cost of living that's provided a lot for me to just be able to concentrate a little bit more on my own work and my creative work and my mastering work. So it's worked out.
Yeah.
You have talked about history now. So coming from Spain as we do, and having a mostly Spanish-speaking audience, we are obviously very interested in the Spanish cultural and historical legacy in the region that obviously dates back centuries ago. From your perspective as a resident on the region, did you pay special attention to this legacy at some point?
Yeah, I mean, it was really pretty fascinating when I first started to learn about it, that there's this long history of Spanish exploration here in the Llano. That was the first Europeans in this region, was the Coronado and Oñate expeditions, and to the point that there are like local tiny town museums that will have Spanish artifacts.
Oh, that's cool.
Like these like ancient conquistador gloves and things like that. But I think because there are not that many people in the region, and it's not necessarily a cultural center, a lot of folks are just not even cognizant of that existing. And like we were talking about before we started, that Spanish culture is really alive and still pretty prevalent in New Mexico, around Santa Fe and Taos, in a way that it just isn't here. That the exploration happened, but
a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but nobody stayed. It was a pretty like inhospitable region, and so they checked it out looking for El Dorado or whatever it may be, and split pretty quick.
Yeah, we were talking before as well, like how vast that land is. Llanos Estacado actually comprises like plenty of states. Oklahoma, part of New Mexico, if I know. So it's a huge region actually, in which you are located in a particular point in space. No, I wanted to ask you specifically about it because I know Littlefield is close to Lubbock, which I guess is like the biggest population center. Also has the university, the Texas Tech. Red Raiders.
Red Raiders.
Patrick Mahomes, and so I guess, is there like kind of like a thriving or an alive at least culture scene? Because I know you work also, you have like there's the co-opt, correct me if I'm wrong, so you're doing some stuff there with the community as well. So just tell us a bit more about that.
Lubbock, it has a long history of country music. It's the hometown of Buddy Holly. So that culture is kind of the most alive and most thriving, and there are like a pretty high number of really talented country songwriters in Lubbock. And there is a smaller like underground culture that's slowly developing, somewhat around Co-op, but also elsewhere. There's like groups of people doing house shows and kind of visual visual and music collaborations in galleries in town. What we do around Co-opt, it's kind of a collective of artists, myself included, many of whom are professors at Texas Tech. And I think for them, it's a way to engage with cultural activity pretty well outside of what they're doing at university, as you might imagine, is necessary. But it's great because rent is fairly cheap. We have a pretty large space and we're able to more or less do what we want. We don't have issues with the neighbors. Everyone's pretty supportive, and I've been able to book a pretty consistent concert series there, doing about 2 shows a month.
That's amazing.
In our garage, and it's like a lot of the music that we put on there is not artists that are going to come through Lubbock otherwise, basically.
Yeah.
And it's kind of necessary that where the routes lead. If you're going west from Austin, there's really
nothing out.
There's nothing out there until you hit, Albuquerque or something. So
wow, that's a long.
Yeah, so it's not been hard to convince people to come and play in Lubbock, surprisingly.
Yeah, that's amazing. I wanted to talk about before, because you mentioned before you studied composition, I think in UNC Greensboro, if I'm correct, and then electronic music at Mills College.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, because we have some experimental music fans, but some others might not be so familiar with this. Mills College is it's a very important institution in the United States, like for the development of forward-thinking music during the 20th century. There's plenty of very well-known composers who have taught there, like Terry Riley, Lou Harrison, Pauline Oliveros, plenty of them. So this is a big institution, in fact, for the development of experimental music during the 20th century. We're particularly very interested in this tradition and development of early electronic music, the San Francisco Tape Center, then drone music, in different forums. So what was your experience there in that sense? I mean, when you attend Mills at that point, what is the environment that you find there? I'm really interested in that. What kind of things are you exposed to at that point of your life?
I mean, I think that experience at Mills is something that I'm still I graduated 10 years ago this year, and I'm still processing things that happened, where I was lucky enough to work with Pauline Oliveros. I got to study with Roscoe Mitchell from Art. And it's just huge. I think about those people every day, and I think the unique thing about Mills that I think a lot of similarly forward-thinking institutions maybe have not done as well is that when I was there, it preserved some sense of prioritizing making radical art for students and the community around it, that we were all really encouraged to go as far out as possible. And it's for better or for worse, any idea or notion that you could throw out was taken seriously and considered and worked through by your peers and by the faculty. And I don't know of a comparable institution that exists elsewhere. And that was a really powerful place to be as a young person. And come on, here's the cat.
Welcome to the cat.
Yeah, you can't do anything without him.
That's fine.
It was a really powerful place to be as a young person, and come on.
Hello, come on.
We are cat lovers here over here.
Yeah. I mean, he's okay. It was just a powerful place to be, where such far out thinking was not only like tolerated but encouraged, and having the community not only of the faculty there, who were just, you know, some of the most forward thinking and brilliant artists in music living, you know, but also my peers and classmates were just pretty brilliant folks who all have like gone on to have pretty amazing careers in music.
I was thinking about that. People who came out like Holly Herndon, William Fuller Collins, Greg Kowalski. Like, there's plenty of people who had come out of that environment. Like, you can see something was happening there for sure, and they were being stimulated in so many different ways that allowed them to have a very interesting trajectory. So,
and a lot of those people, you know, it's like Greg was there before I was there, but he was still living in Oakland, still like tangential to the community. And so there is like a sense of like walking into something bigger than yourself, because it's an easy, like, I remember I went to go see Date Palms play, one of the first shows when I went to Oakland, and I was like, hey, Greg, I'm just starting at Mills, what's up? And it's like, it was nice to be able to make some kind of connection moving to, you know, across the country.
That's wonderful.
Nice. Yeah. And Andrew, even in such a forward-thinking environment, we are certainly aware of some of the limitation imposed by formal education. Correct. More generally, and the way they direct people to create knowledge, art, or music in a certain kind of way. In this sense, it's often mentioned by some musicians, especially in the free improvisation community, for example, how there were plenty of things that they need to unlearn in order to find their own way. Did you experience something like that, something similar at some point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm still experiencing it, where I was coming from music school. I was coming from a composition program and thinking very much in terms of pitch and music theory and writing pieces and what that means, because that was what was emphasized to me for 4 years. And I think I'm still shaking that off, you know, despite my time at Mills. And I think that that really is something that like kind of held me back at Mills, is that I didn't allow myself the kind of open-mindedness that was afforded to me by being there. And, you know, Mills still is an institution. It still has a lot of those same issues. It's just coming from a different angle. Where you're encouraged to think in a philosophical way and like back up your ideas in a philosophical manner that I like frankly wasn't ready for at the time. And I think maybe perhaps now I would be, but it wasn't where my head was at, or where my head was able to be at. Yeah.
Perfect. So now we would like to ask you, given that this particular project for this channel, I mean, stems from a long time partnership, friendship, and collaboration, and we have done plenty of things together through the years. For example, playing music when we were younger and that kind of stuff. We also appreciate the fact that your personal trajectory has been guided in a way, or we can guess so, by a similar logic of like mutual exchange and development with some other key figures, like we could see in your works, like with Seth Christman, Gretchen Cosmo, C. Jantis. Yeah. In that sense, we will love you to tell us a bit more about the specific context of your creative and personal interaction with these people, and what you think has allowed you to establish such a fruitful relationship, both personally and creatively.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I make music, you know, is to find a way to interact with people. And it's since I was a kid, that's just been what I do. Is my friends and I start bands, and that's how we hang out, you know. And I think it's no coincidence that, like, I think some of my most successful music is with Cody and with Seth and with Gretchen, and those are like my dearest friends, you know. And my Gretchen is my partner of 10 years, and those relationships go hand in hand, and I don't really want it any other way. I struggle in friendships that aren't based around some kind of like creative exchange or creative project. And I think it's a way of moving through the world and a way of operating, but it's also, I think it is a privilege of being an artist, is that you're able to like access a social world that's pretty wide, that, you know, most towns or countries that I could go to, there's someone I've worked with, or someone that I'm aware of, or someone that I could be aware of. All I have to do is email and say, like, hey, I do this kind of work. I think what we do is similar. Can we have a beer? Can we have a coffee while I'm in town? And I feel very lucky to have that. And it's honestly like half the reason I do music, is to get to hang out with interesting folks.
Yeah. Gives you the connection. You have the affinity. Of course, it's such a huge part. I mean, we were precisely one of the programs we had before, because we have discussions about different topics, and one of them was friendship, precisely. And it's like how friendship is so much about how what you do together. Like what kind of things you enjoy together, what kind of activities, what kind of environments you create. This is essential for both of us. So that's why you understand like how the logic of collaboration, I mean, is so important for every human endeavor in general, not only for music or art, but like this is the basis like of of human existence in fact. So
yeah, and it just so happens that music is the way I channel it, but it could as easily be anything else.
There's plenty of ways to do it, certainly. Well, we're going to talk about your work more specifically. You already have like a vast musical trajectory. I think you released your first record in 2009, if I'm correct. Something like that. That's well. Yeah. I don't know if it's official, but that's what I saw. Yeah. So it's been a long time, actually. You've been very active from the very beginning until the very present, obviously, and also in a way to present your work in a sense that our audience can understand. I think there's a key notion there, which is the relationship between music and space, actually, like the association between. You talked before about this attempt in a certain way to work with the landscape from a musical perspective, and then I'm sure that changed. We're gonna talk about the change in the methods and the perspectives, because I think it's one of the most interesting things, definitely. But of course, like every art in a non-determinist way, I would say it's a product of where and when it's produced. That's a fact, obviously. But in the case of like American art, I'm not only talking about music. Obviously, I'm talking about the very beginnings, like of the American production of art in the continent. There's this underlying sense of going back to space. Space is the defining characteristic, especially to distinguish themselves like from other traditions, especially European art and so on. And this has evolved, and this has given way in time to a label that has become very common nowadays, especially in the field of music, which is this thing of Americana. Americana. What's Americana? I mean, it's like it's everything. You know, it's country. It's earth. It's drone music. We don't really know what it is anymore. So I would like to know, like, because it's very widely used. You know, you work with labels. You work with press, and like, so they use it a lot, like, to describe what people do essentially. So I'm interested from your perspective, like, how do you perceive this particular label? Do you think it's limiting in some way, or do you think it helps in a way to contextualize what you do?
Yeah, it's kind of like, from one direction it's helpful, and the other it's not. In the sense that genre is like essentially a capitalist invention made to sell records, and I have no interest in participating in that. On the other hand, I do think that there's like, in my work, there's a very specific trajectory from working with Americana and folk music to field recording space music, or like site-specific music. And I think it would be easy to look at those things and see them as unrelated, but to me, they're kind of part of the same pursuit. I started to get interested in folk music after growing up in North Carolina, in a region not really known for its folk music. And I started learning folk songs and playing banjo, and just kind of educating myself about that history, kind of as an attempt to come from somewhere. Because I think as a settler and as a colonizer in the U.S., I have a sense of rootlessness in that, like, I don't have a European place to go back to, but I am kind of an occupier, and in many senses like an unwelcome occupier in the U.S. And there is not really a sense of tradition in my family or in the culture that I grew up in. And so, being a musician already, folk music seemed like something. And so I just started going in that direction and trying to figure my way out. I feel pretty strongly that what I do now is still folk music, in that I am playing music for my community. I'm playing music with my community, even though that's geographically disparate. And I'm trying to make music that is particular to a space and the places that I find myself. And if you're trying to sell records, that definition of folk and Americana is too wide to be useful. But I think understanding that as part of the same legacy is pretty essential for me, and I think for understanding American art in general, because that kind of interaction between high and low art has been, from the get-go, a major part of what makes American art.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Andrew, if we think about figures that could influence you in your earlier works, one of those key figures, or at least Frank and me, we could think so from the music that we were listening of your work. One of those key figures, also relation with the Americana concept that Frank was talking before about, is John Fahey. Given the instrumentation of choice, guitar, banjo, etc., and the motifs employed in some of your records, there seemed to be a strong affinity with the American primitive tradition inaugurated by Tacoma, the label of Fahey. What's your relationship with this tradition, and especially considering that Fahey was already a musical geographist of sorts?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I played solo acoustic guitar for a long time, and I was kind of operating in that world for several years. I love that music really deeply, and I think that the sense that Fahey and like Robbie Basho, all those folks provided the opening for me to see that folk music isn't singing songs that have been around for 100 years. It's, can be a very expansive thing that kind of expands to the edges of whatever you want to build. So the American primitive tradition kind of provided that outlet for me. But I think I am not and was not dedicated enough to the guitar to really operate it as like a real true participant in that, in the way that like Chuck Johnson is, or Matthew Rollin is, or Hayden.
Hayden,
who's a good friend, and it's like I love playing guitar, but I'm just not dedicated in the way that those people are. And so it felt eventually a little bit, not disrespectful, but I felt like an interloper because I wanted to do so much more and couldn't keep my creative impulses contained within that. So.
It's a lot of work, as you said before. I mean, it's and you can tell like from generation to generation. I mean, it's like how many American primitive generations you've mentioned. Hayden, he's a very young guy, obviously, but before that you had, I'm thinking like Glenn Jones, Jack Rose, for instance. Like that's a particular, like we're very interested in the Jack Rose, also because of the work they did with Belt, which is like one of my favorite bands actually. One of my favorite bands, like growing up together, and how they like created another. It was in Virginia, I think, in Richmond. Initially, and they like the sound that they forged out of so many different influences, like, and they were going on until recently, I think. So like those as you said before, they open the gates, and then you can incorporate so much material. And so
it's funny, like Glenn Jones and Jack Rose, like those, they've all done really expansive work, but I think at their core, they're so dedicated to playing guitar.
Incredibly.
And just like Dan Bachman, where he is now going so far out in a direction that I love, but he's a brilliant guitarist in a way that, like, even if I equaled his practice, I don't think that I could play like any of those folks. And it's something that I respect immensely. The ability to focus like that is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's single-minded dedication to your craft, essentially. Like you really need a certain constitution for that, and it's totally understandable. Like some people, when you have some other interests that you want to pursue as well, like you have to find it. It's difficult to find a balance.
There's a lot that goes into it. A lot of practice time, a lot of keeping your guitars in shape, and I don't have that bug,
And it's also really amazing how they, for example, Jack Rose, how they use primitivism tradition to create something completely new, like Pelt you were talking about. When we first listened Ayahuasca, for example, it was like, what the fuck is this? Psychedelic folk primitivism music drone, really amazing.
Our story is really weird because we're just a couple of guys from like southern Spain. I mean, it's like we don't really have any connection. But like for me it was the same. I discovered Fahey one day when I was like 16, and then I started like trying to play guitar as well. And then this like whole horizon, then getting into American folk music, like the anthology of Harry Smith, and then just discovering everything from there, like the Appalachian fiddle music, banjo, like getting deep into that. I mean, it was just incredible. I mean, so much.
Yeah. well, and I think that music has something in it like punk where you hear Fahey and there is a sense of like, I could probably do that.
But you can't.
You can't, but it sounds like you can. And I think that's what's important, is
That's
that
the magic of
it's welcoming, that you're like, there's something in here for me to participate in, rather than feeling like, Fahey is this kind of, monster of the guitar that you'll never equal. I think that's an important aspect of it.
Because in guitar music, there's also plenty of that, the cult of the virtuosity, like all these things, but like it makes you connect with it in a totally different way. Like this is what's really valuable about many of those artists, and what brings it back like to the folk notion that you were talking about before. Like this is something you can do, and this is something you can participate and be a part of a community by engaging into that. So that's certainly one of the most relevant aspects, I think. And this was obviously like a very important part of your musical trajectory, especially. Well, you still have like in fact, we recently listened to the record with Hayden, like, so you're still you have an ongoing conversation with this tradition, because this is the music you love, obviously, and like it's certainly part of that. But we can also say like there's been like some really prominent concerns have come into play in your work, and I'm talking essentially about things we have briefly mentioned before, like the Langd ethic, the deep map, like these kinds of concepts, which are not land art, obviously. They're not strictly musical, as we know, but they have clearly brought so much into your perspective and the way you conceive your production. So just tell us a bit more how you come to this point, because you're telling us like through the, I guess, through the place itself, like, because we were talking before, you were telling me the story of how you moved to Littlefield, and this is pretty much the same story like of Smithson and Heiser, like those kinds of people. They didn't want to build in Nevada or New Mexico necessarily. Like they did that because it was cheap land, and away from everything. Also Matafaa, like the town from Donald Judd, it's a similar case. So coming into this place, it was clearly an influence. But like, what about these concepts, like the deep map, for instance? We talked about that briefly before, in the case of William Listman, which is also very interesting. So just tell us a bit more how you discover all of this.
Yeah, I think part of it is like living in an urban environment, like a cultural center like Oakland, the Bay Area. It's most of the folks I was coming into contact with were musicians and like knowledgeable, coming from experimental music specifically, and that was the environment that I was in. And moving out here, suddenly there was not that, obviously, and so I ended up meeting more visual artists, and those were the folks that I was connecting with, and so there became this notion that like, oh man, maybe what I do doesn't have to be music. Maybe I can expand what I'm working with here. And so around the same time, I think it was actually Seth Chrisman, who, maybe Cody, pointed me towards the book Prairie Earth, which is the William Least Heat-Moon book that he works with the concept of the deep map, which is just kind of like a anthropological view of cartography, where mapping a place isn't just a 2D map on a page. It's a 2D map plus additional ephemera, photos, sounds, interviews, history, in this attempt to deeply map a place. And that concept really quickly became pretty dear to me, that it shifted reading that book shifted the direction of my work entirely very quickly. That suddenly my music isn't about music. It's just about mapping my own life and trying to like collect some kind of document as I go through the landscape, as I go through my life, as I go through my personal relationships, and figuring out a way to express that. And so the Deep Map project it's primarily sound, but it encompasses a lot of other practices for me that I don't necessarily like get out to the world. That if I'm traveling, I'm recording, and every trip or hike or anything is documented, whether that's a drawing or an audio piece or a photograph. And so I have this kind of ever-growing collection of the Deep Map. Or no, that's not called the Deep Map, that's the Land Ethic. And so it's all called the Land Ethic, and kind of like building around this idea of the Deep Map. And it's the sort of thing that I started doing, and I don't really have any goals with it. I'm just doing it. And I've been releasing these albums kind of seasonally on my Bandcamp subscription, and it kind of has spiraled outward where it's at least 24 hours, maybe 36 hours of music at this point. But there's all of these other ephemera that I've collected, and drawings and things like that. And so that is kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about like unlearning things for myself, in that there's not a purpose to it. There's not a piece. There's not, a chord progression. It's just making things all the time.
This is definitely like, obviously, the Land Ethic, this project that you have on Bandcamp, like, which is really amazing. I mean, it's like, because I was like checking your work, as I said before, like the releases themselves. But once I found this, like this is something that to me really stood out in many different ways. First of all, like in the topology of the project itself, like it's not an album. I mean, it's more like, as you said before, it's a collection of so many different things. You have like, as you said before, you have like field recordings, you have conversations, like the conversation about the grasses. You have like snippets like from radio. It's kind of a collage in a way as well, like all these things. Then you have manipulation of certain specific segments that I guess you take back to the studio and you play with synthesizers and granular stuff. I mean, it's really fascinating. Like overall, like the overall scope and the approach is incredible. And something you mentioned as well is the sense of commitment. This is I think like it all comes down to this, like being committed, like with no reward, probably, as you said before. It's not even an object. It's not even an object that you're putting in circulation. Like it's something of a different nature, and it certainly takes a lot of commitment, like to be out there, to be in the position to pay attention to those kinds of situations, so you can actually take something from them. So this is what stood out the most from this project, and what I find is so engaging and so fascinating.
Thanks. Yeah, I think commitment is important. That it's like, maybe I can't commit myself to the 6-string guitar, but I do have a sense of commitment to being an artist and making music, and kind of exploring that to the farthest reaches that I can. And it has a tendency to take over one's whole life, and like, as the Land Ethic kind of does, that it's something that I have to constantly think about every time I go somewhere. But because of what it is, it's not a burden. It's just like more and more integrated into what I do day to day.
And Andrew, if we do a more general kind of question, what it feels like to be out there? What are some of your main ways to navigate the terrain, look for sounds, engage with the environment around you? Mm-hmm. How is this sonic exploration that you're talking about of place occur? How they are occurring?
I mean, it's an adjustment that it's such a sparse region that there's not a lot out here. There's a lot of empty space. And so there is a sense of getting used to, if I want to go see a concert, or if I want to go hike for a little while, I have to drive an hour, 2 hours, and you have to adjust to that not being a big deal. And so that's one, you have to adjust your sense of time and your sense of planning, and your sense of expectation. And another way that I've started to try to navigate my way around here is by biking. And there are, it's mostly agricultural land around here, and so there are kind of endless dirt roads, just kind of forever. And they're pretty easy to navigate because they're all squares, because it's flat. There's not a lot of topography, and so kind of my main personal activity is just cycling, and figuring out how to do that is one thing, like getting tires that are big enough to handle the kind of shitty roads, and you can go forever and ever, and you learn to appreciate these very slight gradations of topography, these very slight changes in the plant life, or this field has been left fallow, and so something interesting is happening here, and being able to visit the same areas and see what pretty slight changes happen, like where the piles of rubble kind of move around for various reasons. And there is it is in a sense like listening to drone music, and that's something I like about it, where there's not a lot of input that you're getting, but then you have to look farther in and find these pretty minute details to give yourself the valuable sensory experience that you want to have.
As you said before, also it's a very sparse environment, so you really have to look out for those kinds of things. And I'm thinking about some of the recordings themselves that you made, and you hear the wildlife there. I mean, you're thinking, it's where are they exactly? You got some wetlands, perhaps, some specific times of the year. This is also important. The seasonal. This is why the seasonal aspect of the work is so important. You have to be there at the right time. If not, it's gonna be hard to catch it.
Well, and then it's I have to learn, that okay, this time of year I can go
those rhythms,
or and so I think it's it's pretty essential that it be a long-term project, that I need many years to kind of go about this.
And Andrew, we think you made clear you still see yourself as a composer, even for example, talking about the lens ethics, even if you barely use instruments, music instrument in this project. One question that often it comes to the mind of people perhaps not so familiar with sound art, this kind of sound art, field recordings, etc. is the process through which is possible to work with these materials in a compositive way. How you're working with, okay, you take those materials and now you are in your studio. How is your relation with these materials, and how are you composing, using them for your compositions?
I mean, I really think that starting to work in this way of collaging audio material and field recordings made me feel more like a composer than I had before. That a lot of my compositions have been, just remembering guitar parts or like recording something and layering and layering and layering instruments. But this is a pretty direct relationship with the material and the organization and manipulation of it. And so I felt like, in a certain way, calling myself a composer is just marketing, that it's just providing a context for somebody to understand some sense of what I do. But starting to work with kind of concrete material and organizing it and having this like pretty fine level of control that you just don't if you're performing from memory or something like that. I really actually started to feel like I'm composing rather than just, throwing music into the computer or whatever it may be. Which was a kind of a moving experience that after so long, oh wow, maybe I am doing this thing.
Because it's a different, like it's the thing you say specifically about the materials. Like, what kind of materials are you working with? Are you working with structures? Are you working with this kinds of like field recordings? I'm very interested, like especially in the interaction, like the way field recordings have been used in a certain compositional trajectory. I'm thinking about the work of Michael Pizarro, for instance, which has been like absolutely huge. Like these kinds of ways, like to find new ways of expression by incorporating those materials in a way that can be productive and I don't know. It's like I see it like a very coherent approach in your case. And I had a question about one of the like the catalogs part. Like how does it fit? Because it's a weird one for sure. I know one of them, like a Cactus Mesa. I think it's in the first. But then the other pieces, like Dream Journal, like those robotic voices, like we were like obsessed about that one in particular. It's like what the hell is going on here?
Like a robot talking to you in apocalyptic, describing you every
the effect it creates. It's amazing. I think it's totally unlike what I've experienced like in a sonic piece for a while. So how does it fit? Like, because I guess like it shares some of the materials and some of the strategies, but you put it out like singly. I mean, it's a work itself. So you tell us about that one in particular, because we really liked it.
Thanks. It's kind of just like by including text and including a voice, it's kind of just the melody of the piece, where there is this pretty dense sound world of a lot of field recordings and synths and
drones.
It's like pretty hard to access and pretty difficult it's not easy listening. And not that adding, me reading these like kind of strange lists of things is any more easily accessible, but I think it's a way to provide a context, a way to provide a context to that work in which that it reads as music rather than pure sound or something like that. And it's just, I like text, I like words, and I like the kind of like accretion of words that happens as you're traveling. You just like kind of see phrases and see place names and pick up on that sort of thing. And I like to it's just another kind of form of information to pack into something. And as far as the the vocal processing, I just like it. Like
it's you have to like it in the first place.
Yeah, it's like I think a lot of the vocals that I've done throughout my career have been auto-tuned and processed, and that's just how I sing. I don't really have interest in presenting my plain voice, and I don't think anyone else has interest. So it's just a way to make it sit and sound like a whole object rather than two disparate elements.
It works beautifully. In that case, I mean, we're really excited to check it out because it's something unique. I mean, if you compare also like to the other parts of it was a really nice one.
Thank you. Yeah, that album felt like a little bit of a turning point. That it's like this is a way to kind of define the rest of my trajectory by presenting all of those pieces together.
What year was Catalog? In
2021, I think.
21, yeah.
21.
Yeah.
For me, it was easier to enjoy than, for example, latest works of you, like Sage Suddenly, for example.
We'll talk later about it.
Easier to enjoy. Like for me, for example, that I am recently listening to this kind of sound art, like field recording and all that stuff. It was more accessible. I don't know if it's the word, more enjoyable.
Yeah. I mean, Sage Suddenly and Dryfall, there's not a lot going on in a lot of those, and a lot of times that's just what I want to hear is just space and just have the opportunity to settle into something. And like
we're gonna talk about Sage Suddenly later because I have a special there's some things I want to ask because really I think it's a phenomenal work and I want to devote some time to it. I mean at the end, but yeah, this is what Fran was talking about before. Is like there's plenty of people who are not like we know, like especially coming from a more musical background, we could say, like and when they face like this like field recordings, sound art, and like it can be a strange experience in so many different ways. Like they're telling you, okay, you can listen to this, I mean, as a work of art, which is the case like with land art as well, no? So it takes a certain receptivity on the part of the listener. That's obvious, I mean.
Yeah, and we have so many expectations of what music is, that it needs to have pitch, it needs to have a steady rhythm, and it needs to have these things
drum beat,
that are essentially irrelevant to music. And it's there's a larger problem there where that music is so easily commodifiable that it's kind of the common interaction with music is that of entertainment rather than that of art. And I think when you start introducing people to field recording and more minimal art forms of music, it's just like it has just no reference to what music should be, so
okay, perfect. So Fran, I think we can talk now about the labels, right?
Yeah, we wanted to talk about because this is also obviously an important part of what you do. The two, you have two of them that I know of. So come on, I missed that one. Okay, well, what is the other one?
So I do Full Spectrum.
Full Spectrum and Rural Situationism. But what's the other one?
And then my kind of day job is running the record label at an organization in the Bay Area called Other Minds.
Ah, I didn't know about that one.
Yeah. I don't talk about that one so much because it is.
You keep it.
It's like it's my job, and I love it, and I get to do really interesting work, but it's still my day job. So yeah, I run the 3 labels, and they all have pretty different focuses. Full Spectrum I've been doing since college, since I was 20, I think, and that's run through kind of a gamut of approaches and interests. And for me personally, it's kind of like an interesting perspective on like music that I've been interested in. There's a period where I was really into American primitive music, and we were releasing some of that and some free improv stuff, and I can track my own interest in music through that. Go on.
No. I was looking at like some of the early releases, and there's people like Sara Davachi, which is like that was my most listening artist from the last year. I mean, it's like the Two Sisters record was incredible. I listened so much to that one last year. Sarah Henni's like. Also, Gil Sansón. Gil Sansón is a guy we actually want to interview, like given that he's Venezuelan and he's definitely a very interesting artist as well that we would really like to. So you can see like from all the people you've put out in your label, like it's like you have so many intersecting trajectories. I mean, it's just really, really interesting. Like people that have different approaches to music and sound making, work with different materials. But overall, I mean, I think it's a very coherent picture at the same time overall.
Thanks. I'm glad you see it that way, because to me it's coherent, but sometimes people get confused, and I think it's just. There's part of a thing of I would like to release work from people in my community. So it's friends and people who, I try to encourage folks and help folks put together a record if it's not necessarily where their head is at in terms of conceiving of their work. Or I like to present work that really isn't going to find a home elsewhere. And I think that we've done that pretty well. And there's kind of all of these threads intertwining through it, where there's, kind of mutant pop songs like what Jacob Wick did on his last record, and Gil does too. And drone and long form things. So they're threads. They're just kind of hard to, I think, pull together sometimes.
Or you can definitely. I mean, and if you pay attention and if you're in contact with people, this is essential. Obviously, you being a musician and also working, having your studio, obviously you have access to those people, and you can share moments with them, and then understand also like what's their perspective and how you can help them, as you said, like bring out whatever they want to do. I mean, that's an incredible. That's the best part, I guess, of that. That role, and also like to learn from those experiences. It's definitely one of the most important things. But there's also like the business, no? Because you have the distributor. It's called the business, right?
Yeah,
that's so funny. We found out like it's the business.
The business has been around for a long time. They're out in Anacortes, and I think it's been a record store since the 70s, which is pretty amazing. Yeah, they're great.
So what about the business part? Because we know, I mean, I kind of like see your approach, like also you were talking about before, like we obviously try conceiving music as a commodity, and like we know the problematic aspects of that. But at the end of the day, we're trying to do something like we're trying for it to be economically sustainable if possible. So how do you see like the confluence of all those different aspects, especially in today's musical ecosystem, which obviously has changed a lot from the olden days, we could say?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's something that like, so Full Spectrum is me, Gretchen, and then Carl Rittger. And the business aspect of it is something that we're constantly working on and constantly thinking about, because it is basically in conflict with everything that we want to do. But the fact is, it's like, it costs a lot of money to print vinyl. It costs a lot of money even to press up some cassettes, and we don't have the money to throw at it and lose. I wish that I did, but we've been pretty lucky that the past 3-4 years there's been a pretty marked increase in interest in what we're doing, and not everything breaks even, but things do well enough that we always have enough to put into the next release, and that's kind of all that matters. That like we don't have to put our own money into it hardly ever, and everything gets everything's happens, and it continues to happen. And we've always said that like the second that we're out of money and don't have enough to put into the next record or whatever we may want to release, the label's over. And it's like we're not even close to having to do that. And so it feels successful even if no one is really making money.
Yeah.
But like I don't know how it's happened, honestly.
Especially in this kind of context, is amazing that you don't have to put your money to release the next work.
Yeah.
And I really hope it keeps happening, because like there's plenty of interesting stuff coming out. I just listened like a couple of days ago, Chick White, I think, and the other, I forgot the name. I'm sorry. Evan Linder, like the Charge recording and all of that. Yeah.
There's always something new, There's always something new, and it's so wonderful because the Chick White and Evans, like those were both folks that I really admired, and working on their records with them was a good way to get to know them better and like hopefully work together in the future. So it's a nice excuse. I hope we can keep going, but it's like every few months there's a moment where you're like, well, we haven't sold anything in 3 weeks, so I guess it's over. But somehow it's going.
Keeps working. That's fantastic. And we wanted to talk obviously also about the label that you created this year, 2023, which is Rural Situationism. As you said before, the focus is different, like in each of the labels. In this one specifically, it certainly tells. You're running it with Yantis, as far as I know, with Cody Yantis.
Let me grab some water real quick.
Yep, sure.
That label, the way it started, I think is pretty interesting. That basically Cody and I did not set out to start a record label. We were just trying to kind of define what we were doing together and like what we were interested in music. Because Cody's a big William Least Heat Moon fan, and I think Deep Map has also been like pretty important for him. And so for several months we were just talking about our music and how we might define it, and like writing like a manifesto of sorts. And gradually we just came across this idea of like, well, what if we started a journal? And that expanded. So the idea of Rural Situationism is that every year we will release 10 CDs of site-specific work that is not field recordings exclusive, but field recordings forward. And every year we'll pick or like, curate a season of 10 artists, release those albums with limited information and only the artist's name, the title, and the location. And then at the end of the year, will release a journal that features more extensive information or photos or whatever ephemera there may be related to the pieces that we've released. And so, and we're kind of like, I don't want to say we're trying to be mysterious because I think it's a little goofy, but we're doing our thing, and we have the focus, and we have like a certain set of constraints of what each rural situationism release needs to be. But we're not advertising it as such. We're just releasing work that we think is good, and then hopefully at the end of the year, we'll provide folks with a little more context of what they've been listening to for the past year. And I think that can, what I would like for it to do is create like a more long scale experience that like, maybe you've only listened to it a couple of times the week it came out, but then in December when the journal comes, there's more information, and like, oh, you have to go back to something.
It's a really interesting approach. Now, did you talk about it? And also, when you look at the presentation of the works, like it's kind of like cartographical. I mean, you cannot really put your finger on what's really going on there. And like I saw one of them came out today, actually.
Yeah,
Jan Mueller.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to it yet. I have to tomorrow. I promise. I'll be on it because the other two were just so interesting. Like, why Francisco Lopez in the first place? Why of all guys in the world, our own Francisco Lopez? We're Franciscos, both of us, by the way, as well.
Yeah. I mean,
so
Francisco, it's like,
he's a legend to me.
Yeah, he's a legend, and like he was one of the first field recording artists that I got deeply into, and so he was kind of top of the list for us, and
probably one of the man with most
that has most field recordings. Like how many? 30 years. Like how in every single place on Earth. I mean, it's like.
Well, and of course, we wrote all these people, and people were like, "Cool, I'll start putting something together." But Francisco said, "Oh, I have the piece. Here it is." They're like,
because he has everything. Like
he works so much.
How much, like he has put out like 8 works, I think, this year. Like it's our archival material. So it was archival also what he sent you.
I think it was something that he recorded in maybe 2020.
Okay, so not
the recordings, and so he'd been working on it for a while. Because I think I get the impression that he's just constantly making work, and like he is well known enough that people like me contact him, and he always has something. And I think that's pretty.
Stays busy. Like you can tell. I mean, it's like he's been working, as you said before, like since the 90s. I mean, he's one of the earliest, and he just doesn't stop. I mean, it's just a constant stream of work and recordings, and it's because he also like his conception is actually very of sound and recording is very interesting. Because I guess you have, I don't know if you're aware of these. I guess I saw in some of your work you have a like with the legacy of John Cage, like he's one of the main, but he's a total, or he was at least a total anti-Cagean. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I don't think I knew that. No.
Yes, he has some writings in his website actually, in which he rails against Cage and his legacy in so many different ways. I really suggest you to check it out, because it's a really interesting perspective in that sense, especially for a person who is also like so deeply devoted to that also tells you like there's different ways to conceive these kinds of activities and approaches. I mean, it's practically endless, but he has some really interesting things to say about it. So, but it was incredible just to see it. Like he was the guy you picked to start the label with, and it's recorded in the States, I think, right? And
that one is all the Southwest in the U.S. But I think his method of kind of he only lets you know so much about where
Yes.
recordings are coming from, which I think is really interesting and like plays into some of the things that we're wanting to do with the label, and that this kind of like being very specific, but at the same time obscuring and like presenting specific places with other specific things laid on top that have no relationship, and just seeing what happens. And so it was kind of ideal that Francisco was the first one.
You've been to any of his shows? You know how it works. With the blindfolds and everything.
Yeah.
It's quite an experience. That was like for me. It was like, I don't remember, like maybe 14 years ago. Like I was just getting more into that. It was like, what the hell is this? And like, it was one of my first experiences, like with field recordings and Music Concrete and all of that, and it really blew my mind. Like, what is he trying to do? And I understood later, like it was quite an experience.
Which work?
I'm sorry.
Which one are you talking about? Which work of Francisco?
His live
performance. A show. I was talking about a show. I was there.
A show.
Like,
okay,
yeah, he puts when you go to a show. I don't know how often he plays, but like it was in Barcelona, 2000 something, with the blindfolds and everything. It was.
You sit outwards from him. Right?
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's a really interesting. Like also like tells you. Like, because I've talked to some people about that. It's like, I don't want to like control like the performance, because it's a performance after all, like the performance environment. I would never put blindfolds on somebody, like, why you tell me to do this? Like, but there's some people who really want to control the conditions in which their work is received. And so, which is, I mean, it's understandable to a certain.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that it's the way he works with that like pretty fine level of control is so different from me, but I really admire it, because it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, and kind of strength of vision to be able to work in that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, now that we'll talk about the Mueller later when I've listened to it. But I'm sure it's gonna be great. We wanted to talk about Sage Satellite because, as I said before, I think it's a really phenomenal work, and for many different reasons. I think like it's a confluence really of the things that you were hinting at in many parts of your trajectory, because it's also surprising, like, to see you were saying before, nothing is happening. Well, I think lots of things are happening, really. Yeah. There's so much activity, really, if you pay attention to it, and if you are really open to what's going on, because like there's so much instrumentation in the first place. I haven't heard so many instruments in any of your records before. I think it's really incredible. It's just such a rich sonic tapestry. There's so many layers to it, and there's like an internal rhythm throughout the piece that keeps on going in certain directions. Then it's really, some of them are really unexpected, like some of them, like when the strings come in, and I don't know, it's like the atmosphere is totally unlike like anything I had experienced in your work previously. But I just think it's a great confluence between all those sonic elements that we had found before. Some parts are really environmental. You had you also told me about I think like stacked down choruses. So there's that part certainly, but then there's a work with like there's pedal steel, I think, like, which is like, it's pedal steel, it's there, but like the context in which it appears, I mean, I think it's really remarkable. So just tell us a bit more about the work, how you came to it, like how.
Yeah, that one, I guess you could think of it as kind of like an expanded land ethic, in that all of the field recordings come from just one trip to Western Colorado. And so it was kind of just a thing where I had gathered I was out there for a week or maybe 10 days, and I gathered so much that I felt like I needed to make a little more of it than a standard land ethic. And so it took a very long time of just sifting through materials and like layering a lot of things. And it was an interesting process of what I gathered kind of started to dictate the form of the piece, where every morning that I was out there, I was staying in a cabin like out in the woods, and like every morning that I was out there, I woke up at 5:30, turned the microphones on outside, and went back to sleep. And I did that every morning, and I was like, okay, obviously those need to all be presented together. And then the kind of there's these other recordings of like explorations of space, whether that's like an interior of a room with the saxophones and the clarinet, or there's a few just like hollowed out trees that I played percussively. And so there were these elements of like testing spaces that ended up being like the kind of backbone for the rest of the piece. And then things really just fit on top of each other, where, you know, I was able to almost just throw everything into the computer and look at it and see how the kind of structure, like the internal structure of every field recording would interact with the others. And then you just kind of put it together and listen for moments where things happen, and kind of slowly over several months just shift things around. So it's almost like working with very slow clay or something like that. It's like slowly solidifying and just nudging it here and there.
Geological process of accumulating strata.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. And it definitely gives that impression. I mean, when we were talking about that aspect of music, like how can you, like, because this is one of the questions that we were all also considering, like, is it really possible to translate a certain place into sound? I mean, it's like there's always like the representation aspect of it, like always something like it's a tricky affair. But like there's
and it's like, this is just what I found in that place, you know. So Francisco Lopez would find something completely different, and I'm interested in that sort of subjectivity. That, you know, I would never present anything I do as like a portrait of a place. Yeah. You know, this is just my weird, specific meandering through it, and my experience of it. And that's really what I'm interested in doing, you know, just having the experiences and then kind of condensing them into something that is presentable to somebody else.
That's incredible. It's, as I said before, it's a record we really enjoyed, and we really hope we're really gonna keep our eyes on rural situationism, and that text I will certainly look for it at the end of the year. I'm gonna listen to the records, of course, like, 'cause it's really, as I said before, it's a really interesting concept, and I'm also interested in like seeing what's the textual thing that it's gonna go with it. Because also that's also one of the, just to conclude a bit with our chat, this is one of the things I found very interesting as well in the land ethic and other works, is like the references that you inserted, like to somebody like David Graeber, which is a really fun guy, because like he was, like, for those people who don't know him, he was an anthropologist. He died, like, I think a couple of years ago.
He died in 2020 of COVID.
Yeah. So so he was working, I think one of his last works was actually about, I don't remember exactly the name now, but like I was talking to a guy the other day, he's a historian, he lives here in Turkey, and he recommended that book, which they're thinking about the beginnings of civilization in Turkey, because here is where you have the big temples of Göbekli Tepe and all of that. So it was such an interesting reference. Let me see if I can find a quote. Yes. The ultimate hidden truth of the world is that something that it is something that we make, and we could just as easily make it differently. So I really loved it because it really encapsulates like this feeling of like there's an inherently political aspect to everything we do, to art, to the way we live, to the way we walk, we dwell in the land. And I thought this is also very very well connected with the land ethic itself by Leopold, which is also one of the key components here, and the situationist angle as well. I think that's really important in the sense of like the society of this spectacle considered as the modern condition essentially of, and this is something that we have to face, and those are not separate areas necessarily. They obviously they all intersect with each other, and like I think it's important as creators and as artists like to consider our perspective from all those different points of view. I think it's really essential.
Well, and I think also to point out where I have no contribution to the field of philosophy, but I can. There's people that are going to listen to what I do and see David Graeber quote or Guy Debord quote and wonder what that is and go off and and I think that's like a valuable function of making work, is that you can point at things for people. And I also think what's interesting is you take the David Graeber quote and it's functioning in one way in his writing, but then you place it into what I'm doing and it's a totally,
and it changes.
And like you're saying, where it's like there, it suddenly is referencing Aldo Leopold and kind of maybe going full circle or pointing at something different within each of those texts. And I don't always know what things mean. You know, sometimes you're just like, this is a thing that I found the week that I was working on this and it moved me. And so you just put it there and then it'll make sense at some point. And I'm interested in that process in my own work of hearing from people what they pull out of things and then kind of rethinking where I'm at. And it's I think that gets into the notion of maybe the spectacular, where the spectacular is maybe not so valuable. It's easy, but if we do these like very minute gestures and live with our work and live with other people's work, then I think that's really like when things start to become really, really valuable and transformative in a way that the spectacle or like spectacular art can never really achieve.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's a great way to summarize, because as I said before, I think those quotes really help contextualize like what you do, and as you said before, sometimes it's not a very conscious decision. Maybe it's like something you find there's a component of contingency and encounter, but this is also what makes it productive, and what allows for different readings and interpretations, which are always so fruitful.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad that somebody's reading those, because I never, you put it there, you never know.
Yeah, definitely. I always try to pay attention because I like to gather those kinds of like many people. It's just like the gear they use to record this and that. I really appreciate you don't have that kind of crap there. Like, who cares? Nobody cares what kind of microphone you use. Like they care about.
No.
I don't care about that.
No, well, it's a totally different interest in music. I know that that's valuable to some folks, but it's just not.
Of course, I respect it, but
yeah.
Okay, Fran, any other questions?
No, I think we have talked about everything that we
Wow.
planned. It was really nice to have you here, Andrew.
Wonderful.
It was a true pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
And we will for sure follow your work from now on.
Likewise. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys talking to me. It's really a blast. Really.
Thank you. It was really a blessing and an honor to have you because you're really our first guest. So we feel incredibly excited. And it was such a nice conversation. We just loved. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Good to meet you guys.
Thank you, Andrew. Bye.
Have a nice one. See you. Bye. Bueno, chicos, pues aquí terminamos esta conversación con nuestro amigo Andrew, que como ya veis es un tipo encantador y nada, hemos podido hablar un buen ratito sobre cositas interesantes. Así que nada, nos veremos en la próxima. Queremos hacer bastante más de esto, de encuentros con artistas, músicos, cineastas, escritores, en fin, ya iremos encontrando las alianzas necesarias. Y nada, hasta entonces, un saludo a todos.
Hasta luego.